Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Student Spotlight Series, where we showcase some of the work our past students have done. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce Sakura Nakanishi, and we're going to be talking a little bit about her experience with CCIR. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what year of school you're in, and a little bit about the course that you took with CCIR?
Yeah, so my name is Sakura Nakanishi. I go to a high school in Southern California, and I'm currently a senior. And I was part of the CCIR Future Scholars Program, and specifically, I took part in the molecular biology and drug discovery course under the mentorship of Dr. Sigdem Sahin, who is a postdoc at Harvard University.
Mhm. So, how did you become interested in the program?
So actually, another mentor of mine recommended the program to me because I was really interested in science, specifically in biology, and I wanted to kind of explore the research side of biology early on in high school.
Mhm.
But I didn't have the opportunity until now, so I kind of focused on the competition side of things up until this summer, which is when I took this course. Um, so yeah, that's how I was introduced to the program, and then that's ultimately why I applied and participated.
Mhm. So, how was the course structured, and what did you learn?
So the first part of the course was basically just lectures. So Dr. Sahin gave us an overview about molecular biology and also drug discovery. And then the second half of the course, we were given the opportunity to create a research topic of our choice and then explore that by writing a literature review.
Mhm. So you mentioned that previously you've had a lot of competition experience, but hadn't taken a course like this before. And what did you feel like the major difference was in terms of what you learned or what the learning experience was like?
Of course. So, for competition-based studying, I guess, it's more of just memorizing and understanding the information versus research. And this course kind of it requires a lot more critical thinking, I think, and a lot of problem solving compared to the competition side of things where you just know the information and then kind of spit it out. Versus in research, you kind of have to not only know the information, but you have to think about how you want to use that information to write a paper or solve a problem, depending on what you're doing.
Hmm. Can you say a little bit about what your research project was?
So my project was about mantle cell lymphoma, which is a type of B cell cancer, and I wanted to look at specific drugs that target pathways in the disease. So that kind of approach to drug development is called targeted therapy. So in contrast to like chemotherapy, which is one of the most common ways to treat cancer, um, targeted drug therapy, it's much more specific and it looks for specific aberrant pathways or specific molecules in a pathway in a cancer um, to target. So, in order to help with symptoms. So it's much more precise and it allows for a better treatment for the patient, usually.
Hmm. So how did you become interested in that topic?
So actually, I was also doing wet lab research at the same time while doing CCIRs through another program locally. And we were looking at immune cells, specifically B cells, and the cell type I was working with was mantle cell lymphoma. So I thought it would be a great way to connect the two projects I was doing concurrently over the summer by also studying the same disease through CCIR.
Hmm. So how do you feel like the lab work you were doing, I guess, influenced your research project or vice versa?
Uh, so like we were just handed the cell type. We didn't have a choice on what cell type we got to work with. So I was given mantle cell lymphoma as the cell to study. So then um, through the research there, I kind of noticed how I didn't know certain things that might be helpful in the research I was doing. So then I thought maybe I should more specifically look at mantle cell lymphoma, specifically through the drug discovery perspective, because during my wet lab research, I was looking at curcumin, which is a substance found in turmeric. So I was looking at natural compounds and how that impacts disease progression in mantle cell lymphoma. So I thought looking at other drugs, which are already approved and synthetically made, I thought that was another approach that might be interesting.
So just to be clear, for your research, you were for the research project with the class, you were looking at other drugs that had already been made, or was that at the wet lab?
At the wet lab, I looked at turmeric, and then
Oh,
in CCIR, I looked at compounds that are already approved and not natural compounds, so synthetically made compounds.
mhm. Can you say a little bit about what your key insights or takeaways were from the research project?
So I realized that mantle cell lymphoma is actually a very rare condition. Not a lot of people have it, and it's also not very well known compared to other lymphomas and leukemias, which are blood-related cancers. But there's also a very, very high mortality rate for mantle cell lymphoma. So I I realized that there's a greater need for more awareness about the topic because a lot of people don't know about the condition. I didn't know about the condition. So that was one thing. Another thing I realized was that um, so there's antibiotic resistance in bacteria, but I didn't know that there can also be resistance to drugs in other cells, including our cells, which is the case for mantle cell lymphoma. So um, a lot of drugs that they're currently using right now for treating mantle cell lymphoma um, have a tendency for people to actually develop resistance to that. So then the more you provide that drug to the patient, it actually makes the cancer more resistant because only the resistant cells survive. So I didn't know that there's that kind of application to resistance. So it applies not only to bacteria, but also to human cells, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I also didn't know that. Yeah, that's really fascinating. So, in doing your research, did you come upon any ways to mitigate that problem, or was that part of your project, or was that just sort of something that came out of your other interests?
So that was like a broader like takeaway I came up with when I was doing my research. And I did a literature review, so I didn't actually like discover anything new, like specifically, but I kind of a lot of my discussion is focused around how there's a greater need to do research and related to mantle cell lymphoma specifically, looking at other pathways that haven't been investigated yet and trying to look for drugs that target that. So yeah, it was a big part of my discussion and like my conclusion on my paper.
So, you mentioned your literature review. Could you say a little bit more about what your methodology was, or what the sort of research process was like?
Yeah, so uh, it's just like a systematic review. So I was looking through a bunch of different papers. But first of all, I didn't really know what mantle cell lymphoma, like the overall condition was like.
Mhm.
So first I just read papers about the general overview. So there's certain articles out there that just talk about a lot of different aspects of a condition. Um, for example, on PubMed. So I just read those first, and then once I had like a general understanding of the condition, I then looked at targeted cell therapies. So I looked at specific drugs um, that are being used, and then which pathway they affect. And then because a lot of those papers, they kind of expected the reader to already have a background in the pathways they were talking about, I had to read papers regarding the pathways as well because I was not familiar with a lot of them. So
Mhm.
yeah, there's a lot of going back and forth from my central interest, in addition to getting supplemental information so that I could understand the papers that were talking about what I wanted
Mhm.
to write about in my paper.
Can you say a little bit about how, if at all, your TA or your instructor supported you during the research?
Yeah, so first off, my TA and my main teacher were the same person, so it's Dr. Signam Zahin. So we didn't have a separate TA for our course, but she was really helpful in giving us, again, as I said, a broad overview about molecular biology and drug discovery. But then during our research aspect of our course, the second half, she offered us like a lot of different ideas for what topics we could talk about and write about. So a lot of people in my class, they had little to no experience with research just like me. So they didn't really know what they wanted to write about. So she gave a lot of suggestions based on like our general interests. So um, for me, I was initially going to write about the endocrine system and certain diseases related to that. And then she gave me a bunch of suggestions related to that. But ultimately, I wrote about mantle cell lymphoma because of my other research I was doing. But overall, yeah, she was very helpful in even just picking a topic, and she was supportive of the topic I ultimately did end up choosing. And then while we were writing the papers, she gave us guidance on how to write it. So first of all, she taught us to write like a solid outline about what we wanted to write about because for literature review, there's just so much information that you could talk about. So specifying and figuring out what exactly you want to write about is a good way to get started, or else it's very overwhelming to look at all the information that's out there regarding the topic of your choice. And then in addition to that, she gave us tips on how to find articles, which articles are the most relevant to our topics. And then we also had a chance to look for articles from for other students. So, for example, one of the students in my class was learning about Crohn's disease. So I got to learn about a broad variety of topics, not only related to my topic, but also about other conditions that other people were studying. So I think I got a really comprehensive understanding of how molecular biology and drug discovery can be applied to a variety of diseases.
Mhm. So you mentioned that you didn't really have any prior experience with doing independent research, right?
Mm-hmm.
What did you feel like was the most difficult part or the most, yeah, what did you find to be the most difficult part of learning to do independent research?
I think for me, well, in the like for the first thing, I didn't even know that there's two types of research. So one is experimental research, which is like working in the lab, which was what I did with the other course I took, not related to CCIR. And then there's literature review writing, which is what I did for CCIR. So I didn't even know that there's two types of research in the first place. I only thought experimental research was what like research was.
Mhm.
So that was like something really surprising for me when I first learned about CCIR because it's an entirely online program. So then I was like, how is this research? But I realized that there's actually two types of research, which are both very important to the scientific community, and they work together to allow for scientific progress. But for what was most difficult, I think it was just looking for articles and understanding the information. So, as I said earlier, there's like so much information regarding a topic, even if it's specific, like mantle cell lymphoma. So I think just figuring out what to read and what to take away from each article I read was really difficult. And also to write something different from what was in the paper. So not writing like a summary of other articles, but actually coming up with my own insights was really hard. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm in the humanities. So in a certain sense, all of the research we do is literature reviews. And yeah, it's tough. Like there's just so much stuff out there, and if you want to publish an article and you miss, some important source, the reviewers uh are going to call you out on it and reject your paper. So you just have to read hundreds and hundreds of articles. So yeah, I agree. It's difficult. It's really time consuming. Though I feel like it's also pretty rewarding because I feel like once you get through the literature review, you really feel like you have a sense of what's happening in sort of a whole field. So it can be
Mhm.
satisfying. Um, so do you feel like the program has prepared you to continue doing research in the future?
Yeah, for sure. Initially, my career goal was veterinary medicine, just pure veterinary medicine, but now I'm more interested in also looking at the research side of things. Um, so right now, my career goal is to become a veterinary scientist. So I want to do not only clinical stuff, but also the research side of things, which was what came out of CCIR initially up until um, this spring. I was just thinking I wanted to do veterinary medicine in the clinical side of things. So that was a big change from my experience. And also for college, I definitely want to continue doing research, both the literature review type of research as well as experimental.
Cool. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I think that's a really important takeaway because I feel like that does open up a whole sort of new area of work that you can do. Do you have any advice for someone who would be coming into the program who doesn't have experience doing research?
Yeah, so for me, like I had zero experience, so I didn't really know what to expect, but I think being understanding what your interests are, and if you don't have interests, or specific interests, like exploring everything and then picking whatever interests you and going with that is really important. Because writing a literature review, you have to read a lot of information about one specific topic. So if you're not interested in that topic, then it's really hard to write a literature review. So I think just going with your interests and seeing where it takes you would be really important. And also, I think it's important to be open-minded and also collaborate with other students. I was really inspired by the other people in my class who were writing about a wide variety of things. But um, yeah, it was very interesting to see all their interests and seeing where it took them as well. So
Yeah, I think that that's definitely so important. Like you have to be interested in the work you're doing. I know of people that have written entire dissertations on topics that they don't really care about, and it's miserable. So yeah, I think that's really good advice. Um, so do you plan to publish your paper anywhere or do anything else with it?
yeah, so I finished writing my paper at the conclusion of the program, and I submitted it to a academic journal. So I submitted it to a journal called Curie, I believe, academic journal, and I'm waiting for to see whether I was accepted or not. But if I am accepted, that's awesome. But
Yeah.
if not, I think I'll further refine my paper and then maybe see where else I could publish, or perhaps I might consider applying to a conference so I can present my research through a different way.
Cool. Yeah, that's really exciting. I hope that you're able to get that published. So do you have any final overall thoughts about your experience with the program?
Um, Overall, I just learned what the research side of science was, because for me, as I mentioned earlier, I had only known the theoretical side, just knowing things. So I think it was really eye-opening to see this whole other world of what science really is. And I thank CCIR for giving me this opportunity to learn so much more about not only biology, but the whole scientific process and research.
Cool. Yeah, I'm really glad that it was such an impactful and informative experience. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.